series, Faces of Grace. What I heard him saying was, is it possible there are levels of God's amazing grace that we have yet to explore and experience? Could it be the reality of God's grace has escaped us to some degree? I think of a statement I read during seminary. It was meaningful to me, particularly because I was going to be pastoring in Iowa or Missouri, and this was written to the brothers and sisters in Iowa. And the words that stand out in my mind are these: you are living far below your privileges. What was their problem? Years ago, one of my relatives bought a beautiful home in Spring, north of Houston, Texas. It was a large home, over 3,000 square feet, on a large lot, over an acre, with a tree-lined drive and a pool. Why, who wouldn't want to live there? Every morning you wake up and it's spring. Someone says, well, I remember a few years ago there was significant flooding around areas of Houston. And that's true, but their neighborhood was at a good elevation above the floods. But there were some issues. One of the occupants of the home had a tendency that someone in Sabbath school mentioned, a bit of a hoarder. And over the years, things began to accumulate in the home until you didn't really have to worry about falling over. There were just pathways in the home. The pool didn't get taken care of, and eventually it was not for swimming, at least by people. Well, there were things that needed to be done, like the hot water heater went out. But it was too embarrassing to call for a service person. Why, they might report us, and our house would be condemned, and then where would we live? It was unthinkable. More recent times, they still own the big house on the large lot with the tree-lined drive and the pool. But they live in a motel with access to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the house is occupied largely by rats. Some would suggest they might be living below their privileges. We see the shortcoming of others, but when we shine the light on our own hearts, are we living below our privileges? It's not a new phenomenon. There were people in this category in Jesus' day. We meet some in Mark's 6th chapter, and I invite you to turn there. What was the problem? In Mark chapter 6, and verse 1, we read, "And Jesus went out from thence and came into his own country, and his disciples followed him." He came out from there. Where was there? Previous chapter is helpful. The last picture we have in chapter 5 is Jesus at Jairus' house. Do you remember that story? There was a weeping and a wailing till Jesus said, "She's only sleeping, she's not dead." And they shifted gears fast from wailing to laughing in his face. Well, the gentleman seemed so sincere, but obviously his elevator didn't quite make it to the top. Something wasn't quite right. But Jesus put them out. And taking the 12-year youngin by the hand said, "Arise." And she did. She did. Had you been her father or her mother, what would you have done? Would you have offered Jesus $50 for making a house call? You have turned our mourning into dancing, Lord. Our lips are filled with your praise. Wouldn't you be glad Jesus got the last laugh? The mourners all got out. Unfortunately, they had not had the foresight to get a second degree, or at least a minor in rejoicing. Or maybe they could have had a job for the rest of the week or the rest of the month, or even longer. You have turned our mourning into dancing, Lord. When the bridegroom is there, Jesus left there and came home, his home country. Isn't it wonderful to come home? In Jesus' case, not so much. As the chapter progresses, but word got around, Jesus is teaching a Sabbath school class. Verse 2, would you have gone? Imagine, would you have a question to ask him? I recognize Jesus doesn't teach a class here each Sabbath, but we have some meaningful Sabbath school classes. If you don't come, you're missing out. I've noticed some people come and don't stay for the rest of the service. They get so filled in Sabbath school they can't hold anymore. Jesus was teaching Sabbath school. And the people in Jesus' class were blown away. Verse 2 tells us, this guy is deep. What wisdom. We think of Romans, the 11th chapter. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. You'd get enough from one class when Jesus was teaching to chew on all week and all your life. Not just wisdom is noted, but power, mighty works, it says. One example of his power and might could have been from chapter 5, verse 30, when Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned about in the press and said, "Who touched my clothes?" Remember that incident where Jesus encountered the whole story, lady? Power went out of him. And the one who had been on the prayer group's prayer list for 12 years was healed, whole, completely, free of charge. And Jesus was kind enough to hear her whole sad story. Her whole story. In spite of Jairus rolling his eyes and impatiently shifting his weight. Come on, Jesus. In Sabbath school class, Jesus' listeners were closing their heart's doors. Who does he think he is? They said. Verse 3, he's just a small business proprietor, carpenter's kid, grew up with our kids. He's one of us, but he's not one of us. He's trying to show us up. They were offended, it says. Was Jesus out of line? Being offended was their decision. Jesus may have thought, well, I must be on track here, giving me what prophets always get: rejection. And there, verse 5 records a sad statement. There he could do no mighty work, save he laid his hands on a few sick folk and healed them. He was snubbed at home. Could it be Jesus comes to his own people, his own country, his brothers and sisters, his own house, even today, and wants to do so much, a mighty work, yet has to settle for just healing a few sick folk? Does he want to do a mighty work? What would hold him back? Verse 6 indicates a possibility. He marveled because of their unbelief. Marveled. He was shocked. They were amazed at his mighty work. He was amazed at their puny faith, their unbelief. He was without honor because they were without faith. How often Jesus wishes to do more here at home. Let's not limit him to just healing a few sick folk. Maybe if your prayer list is a little like mine, we need to upgrade a little bit. We don't want to limit Jesus the way they did. Maybe we need to add a few requests to the list, not just a few sick folk. Jesus called the 12 and gave them power, verse 7. He was a person of power, passed along through his Father's power. They went out and preached that men should repent. They cast out devils, anointed the sick, and they were healed. They were multiplying the ministry of Jesus. They were like many Jesuses going around, doing the work that he did. Cast out devils, healing the sick. It was amazing. Word got around. Even Herod the king, verse 14, took note with some trepidation. The only person he had dealt with who he'd had to look up to had been John the Baptizer. John had power. He had the Holy Spirit, you remember. Herod couldn't put it past him to come back from the dead. Who else could be doing such mighty work? Well, some said, no way, John's dead. This is Elijah. What must have Jesus thought? All these confused people, deceived people. Jesus had no question. He said John the Baptist was Elijah. And his fate will be mine too, Jesus acknowledged. Herod believed John to be just and holy, verse 20, and thus he feared him. He didn't intend to be guilty of killing a holy man. He just felt circumstances forced his hand. He swore to Herodias, verse 23, I'll give you anything you ask, up to half my kingdom. And we say, for one dance, I'll give you my birthright for one bowl of lentils. It was not a sensible thing to do, but who uses good judgment when the libations are flowing at the party? He wanted to appear generous, much like King Ahasuerus in Esther chapter 5 and 7. What do you want, my queen? I'll give you up to half my kingdom. It's human to be halfway givers. Maybe you've known a few. It's divine to be an all-out giver. God so loved the world, he gave up to half his son. Jesus said, it's your Father's good pleasure to give you up to half the kingdom. No. Luke 12, Jesus said, it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Any takers? What's so compelling about a rat-infested house in spring if you can be a sharer in the kingdom? Verse 25 of Mark 6, Herodias took Herod's offer as a means for revenge, the life of John the Baptist. The king was sorry, regretful, but he reasoned this way: I must keep my promise. I must guard my reputation and keep my word, even if it kills somebody else. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. The death of John the Baptist would have been a serious blow to Jesus' disciples, particularly those who had been John's disciples. It might have been enough to derail them, except that Jesus had put them to work, remember? He had sent them out. He had empowered them. They were too busy ministering to be navel gazers. They came, verse 30, to tell Jesus all about it, how people had been blessed, how they'd been strengthened to teach and to heal. Wouldn't that be a testimony? Wow. Maybe you've observed those engaged in rewarding ministry. They tend not to be nitpicking and criticizing. The path of service is a blessed path, I have heard. But even ministry can become consuming. Jesus said, let's get away, verse 31. Head for the desert, verse 32. Yet even in that forsaken place, there were people. People even in the desert. Could you believe it? Even today. People in the desert. What do you do when your vacation gets canceled because people need your attention? It seemed whenever mom and dad were ready to take a vacation the night before, there was always a crisis. Somebody needed help. There was an emergency. You wonder if you should even go. People need help. What did Jesus do? If you're Jesus, you help the people. You talk to them. He taught them many things, verse 34 says. Unfortunately, we don't have that recording, but he taught them many things. The shepherd cares for the sheep, and because Jesus cared, he shared many lessons. Jesus' hearers were glued to the spot. Service ran right through lunch, all afternoon, and right through supper. It was getting late, verse 35 records, and Jesus' disciples proposed a plan. Announce, class dismissed. Best go find some eats. If you can find anything in the desert, good luck. But Jesus countered with another plan. You feed them. What? Who's paying? This would take 9 months' wages to deliver a meal to this crowd, Philip exclaimed. What if Jesus' disciples had believed that all his biddings were enablings? Hey, Nate, Tom, Andy, Matt, did you hear what Jesus just said? He empowered us to feed this crowd. There's about to be a mighty work right here. Would God have multiplied the food if one of the disciples had asked the blessing? But that's not how the story goes. The disciples were clueless, just almost offended that Jesus had suggested they do something. No idea what to do. They stood around looking at each other. And Jesus made a suggestion. Well, for starters, let's see what you've got. Couldn't argue with that logic, so, well, let's see who volunteers to go take inventory of our mobile food pantry. And it didn't take long to figure the totals. They had to print off in short order 5 loaves and 2 fish. And as the Gospel of John tells the story, even that supply was borrowed from a lad in the crowd. Jesus, verse 39, directed then, well, they better be sitting down for this. And we see this as the posture of expectancy. Jesus said, have them sit down. It's like ringing the dinner bell. Everybody gathers at the table, and their plates are set, and there's no food on the table. Sit down. Then he took the fixings, presented them to God, blessed them, and began to divide them for the disciples to pass out. And maybe they nearly did. Maybe they nearly did. Thank you, sir. My food was gone. It was so kind of you to put on this meal. Where did you get such fresh bread? I thought it was baked this very afternoon. Oh, it's Jesus' special recipe. He asked his Father to bless it. Yes, it is the best. I'm looking forward to having some. Well, tell your master thank you, please. Jesus asked the blessing, and it was blessed. Everybody ate and had plenty. Then the disciples made a final pass with some empty baskets to gather the fragments. 1 full basket to be held by each usher who had said, well, there's no way we could feed this crowd. Not this congregation. For starters, it's not in the budget. And the stores are closed. And they're too far away to be of any good anyhow. So just get rid of these people. They were left holding the baskets. 12 baskets of evidence that a mighty work had just been witnessed. Almost a tithe. There was a general consensus among the crowd that Jesus was the man of the hour. Teacher, healer, chef, talk about a problem solver, and so nice besides. As the positive vibes were racing through the well-fed throng, Jesus announced, class dismissed. The party's over. Except the disciples were on the other side now. They didn't want the class dismissed. They didn't want to go. Reminds me of the reaction some moms get when they announce at the park, come, Jimmy, it's time to go home. Or when Daddy says, come on, Samantha, it's bedtime. No immediate cooperation. We read in verse 45, so he constrained them. What does it mean to constrain them? It's like compelling. It's really laying down the law. Compelled them to get into the ship and to go to the other side, to unto Bethsaida while he sent away the people. And verse 46 says, and when he had sent them away, he departed into a mountain to pray. They had wanted Jesus to send the people away hungry, but not now. Not now that they were well fed. But if Jesus got an idea in his mind, it was pretty hard to change his mind. Peter had tried without much success. What does the good shepherd go to the mountains to do? According to Matthew 18, he goes to seek the lost sheep and the stray. And in this case, to pray. Jesus was alone, praying on the mountain. While the people had gone on their journeys, hopefully encouraged with a mighty work. The disciples, meanwhile, were having a rather rough go. Things were not so peaceful on the lake. Verse 48 says that Jesus saw them toiling or distressed in rowing, for the wind was contrary to them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking upon the sea, and would have passed them by. This word, toiling or straining or distressed, is translated in Revelation, the 12th chapter, as birth pains. Birth pains. Imagine the cacophony of 12 fishermen having babies. It would have been an unpleasant sound and an unpleasant ordeal. This is what Jesus witnessed. This was not a time to merrily sing, row, row, row your boat gently across the sea. They were in a big problem. They were so into their problem, it didn't even occur to them that Jesus might be willing to help them, that he might even then be coming to help them. They were troubled. They were terrified. Verse 50. Verse 49 says, when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it had been a spirit or an apparition, and they cried out. They all saw him and were troubled. And immediately he talked with them and said to them, be of good cheer. It is I. Be not afraid. They were troubled. Their lives were flashing before them. Like Zechariah in Luke, the 1st chapter, when an angel appeared as he was ministering at the temple, he was gripped with fear. He didn't immediately think a positive thought. He thought of the worst. And here they are doing the same. They thought it was a spirit. Jesus invites us, don't let your heart be that way. Rather, trust in God and trust in me. He says in verse 50, take courage, be of good cheer. This is not the first time Jesus used this phrase. Jesus enjoyed sharing this good news. Be of good cheer. Did he have a good reason to share that? Matthew, the 9th chapter, he said to a man who had been lying in a sheet, towed by 4 friends, son, take courage, be of good cheer. Your sins are forgiven. That was worth being of good cheer about. Later in the same chapter, Matthew 9, he said, take courage, daughter. You are whole. You are well. That was worth being of good cheer about. And here, Jesus uses that phrase again. Be of good cheer. Mark the 10th chapter. Blind Bart heard these words. The people who were near him and sick of all his ranting and raving, calling for Jesus, said, take courage, be of good cheer, man. Jesus is calling for you. He heard you. And blind Bart wasn't much longer. Acts chapter 23. The Pharisees and Sadducees had gotten into it. It was a doctrinal war. And those can be pretty savage. So savage, the Roman commander felt obliged to haul Paul out of there. And in jail that night, the Lord stood by Paul and said, be of good cheer. Take courage. You're going to continue your ministry for me. Be of good cheer. Here in Mark 6, Jesus gives the reason his disciples should take courage. Be encouraged to take great hope. And that is, Jesus says, I am. I am. Be of good cheer. I am. Be not afraid. Because Jesus is, we can take courage. We don't have to be afraid. It seems to be the devil's game today to make people afraid. Afraid of everything, afraid of living, afraid to go outside, afraid to go to church, afraid to go anywhere. Fear. Jesus says, take courage. I am. I'm courageous. I am, because Jesus is the great I am. We can take courage. Verse 51 says, and he went up unto them in the ship, and the wind ceased, and they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure, and wondered. It's hard to put it into words how shocked and amazed and awed they were. I mean, the problem was so overwhelming. It was just unresolvable. And Jesus stopped the wind, and the waves flatlined, and it was just quiet, calm. They were amazed beyond measure. And yet, verse 52 says, they understood not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. The hearts were hard. They still weren't able to appreciate fully what Jesus had done because the hearts weren't receptive to understand. Verse 53 says, when they passed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and drew to the shore. And when they were come out of the ship, straightway they knew him. They passed over and came to Gennesaret. Jesus had told them that they were supposed to come to this place. And you might remember in the previous chapters, chapter 5, there was a serious incident in this area. There were some demoniacs, and some pigs ran off the hill, off the cliff, and were drowned. And the pig herders went back to town and said, it's not our fault. We didn't do it. There's this guy out there who did it. It's his fault. And all the people came out to see what had happened. And the demoniacs were sitting at Jesus' feet, and they were afraid. And they asked Jesus to leave. And Jesus didn't say, "This is my Father's world. I'm here, thank you." Jesus left. And the demoniac who wanted to go with him, he said, "No, you go back and tell the great things the Lord has done for you." And apparently, he did his job. He did his homework. Because this time, when the people came, they knew Jesus. Verse 54. And verse 55 says they ran through the whole region round about and began to carry about in beds those who were sick, where they heard he was. They ran, carrying the good news. He's back. He's back. He's back. This guy who was here before is back. The cry went out. He's here. Come get help. Anybody, if you've got a problem, he can fix it. If you're sick, he can heal you. If you have an impossible situation, he's the fixer. He's done it before. He can do it again. Verse 55 seems to me a bit familiar. Could it be it's our assignment? Revelation, the 14th chapter. Instead of the running through the whole region, it's an angel flying through the midst of heaven crying out, "Fear God and give glory to him." He's coming back. Worship him. The one who made, the one who can remake, the one who can do a mighty work. You'll meet many people with problems running with that good news. You may run into trouble yourself. What can you do? You can offer hope and help. You can remind people of what Jesus has done for others, like the demoniac, maybe what he's done for you. Sharing that good news. I know a healer, one who so longs to do a mighty work. If only someone would believe. There was no limit to what Jesus could do. Verse 56 says, "Whithersoever he entered, into villages or cities or country, they laid the sick in the streets, besought him that they might touch, if it were, the border of his garment. And as many as touched him were made whole, well, complete." Jesus is the same today as he was in Mark chapter 6. He still longs to do a mighty work. A mighty work. And his only limit is your belief.